Even though my colleague, Miss Burstyn, is not a hockey fan, she is as delighted as I am to welcome our next guest, because even casual observers of the Toronto Maple Leafs will know the name of one of the greatest right-wingers in Leafs history, Ron Ellis. A native of Lindsay, Ontario, Ron played 18 seasons for the Leafs, including their last Stanley Cup winning year in 1967. Only 4 players in history have played more games for the Leafs than Ron: George Armstrong, Dave Keon, Boreas Salming, and the great Tim Horton.
Ron was also a key member of the legendary Team Canada in the 1972 Summit Series against the Russians. He played on 4 All-Star teams during his career, and when he retired after 18 seasons with the Leafs in 1981, his number 6 jersey was officially retired by the Leafs in honor of his great career. Ron, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Helen. Nice to be with you, Jim.
Thank you, sir.
So thanks for joining us. And as Jim said up front, I'm not a huge hockey fan, but I've known the name Ron Ellis pretty much all my life. So let's start with your life and how you, as a young kid from Lindsay, got yourself into the NHL, which was hard to do back in the 1960s, wasn't it?
It was difficult. There were only 6 teams in the league at that time, so you're looking at about 110 players. Very hard to break into that group and back then players remained with teams a little longer than they do today, and teams showed loyalty to players, so they kept them and didn't move them and trade them. So you got familiar with your favorite player on a favorite team. He might be there for 10 years, so you got to be able to watch him and not playing with other teams is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, things for me started normally. Enjoyed playing minor hockey. First year up in North Bay, froze my feet at the age of 10 at outdoor rinks, of course, like we all did. But my father was an Air Force pilot, joined the Air Force during the war, and we moved around quite a bit. And I was playing in Ottawa, my minor hockey in Ottawa, when I was scouted by the Toronto Maple Leafs. That was before the days of the draft. And they had a Leaf scout in Ottawa that would look for players, and I was about 14. This gentleman came up to me and he said, "Are your parents at the game?" And I said, "Yes, they're right over there." And that led to a visit from Punch Imlach and King Clancy came to our home in Ottawa, talked to my parents, and it was agreed that the following season I would move to Toronto, and I lived with the family. My family stayed in Ottawa, of course, and lived with another family as a billet, and at the age of 14, turning 15, started my first year with the Toronto Marlboros.
That must have been a dream.
Yes.
It must have been a dream. And you played for 4 seasons with the Marlies, and then at the age of 19, you moved up to the Leafs. You actually played 1 game for the Leafs in 63, but you moved up full-time to the Leafs in 1964. Most kids would have gone perhaps from Junior A, which the Marlies were, into the American Hockey League or the Central Hockey League, but you went right up to the team. So you must have been a bit of a prodigy. But tell us what it was like as a 19-year-old kid, still theoretically wet behind the ears, joining what was the Stanley Cup winning team in 1964, and working for the rather prickly Punch Imlach as the coach.
Well, actually, the Leafs had won 3 Stanley Cups in a row at that time, and I was trying to break into that lineup. It just so happened the 3rd year of their 3 in a row, as a Marley, I played on the Memorial Cup team with the Marlies, and I led the team in goals, and this was sort of okay, this is good, this is part of the process. But I had a break, and I listened to a mentor. My coach, Jim Gregory, who is now a vice president in the NHL, but he was coach of the Marlies at that time. At the start of the season, he said, "Ron, I want you to consider a position change." I always played center, Jim, my whole life. Minor hockey, all my junior, center. He said, "Ron, I want you to consider moving to the right wing." I said, "But Jim, I'm a centerman, I want to play center." He said, "Ron, look at the Leafs. Keon, Pulford, Billy Harris.
Armstrong.
Armstrong was a right winger.
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
So they had 4 Red Kelly, of course.
Yeah.
4 wonderful centermen. He says, Ronnie, you're not going to break that lineup. You're not going to break into that lineup. There's a spot on the right side. They traded Bob Nevin that year.
Yep.
And he was a right winger. So I understood what he was trying to tell me. If I could have a good year at right wing, I might have that opportunity to move from the Marlies straight to the Leafs. Two of my teammates from the Marlies, Pete Stemkowski and Mike Walton,
Yeah.
2 great players,
Yeah.
centermen.
Yep.
They had to
Took
play in
them
the
a little
minors.
longer.
They had to
Yeah.
play in the minors
Yeah.
for a couple of years because there wasn't room. So that was my big break, moving to the right wing.
Now, because I don't know hockey very well, you have to explain to me, does being a right winger take a whole different set of skills than being a center?
Yes, much
Good
so.
question.
Yes, very
Yeah.
good question. Yeah, the centerman is the one that takes the face off. And the centerman makes plays. I used to love taking the face off and making plays to my wingers. But the wingers are usually the guys that finish. The centerman is the playmaker usually. So moving to the right side, I had to learn a whole new game. And it was very beneficial to me because I learned to play a two-way game. And that's what kept me in the league. I led the team in goals, Memorial Cup year. But when you get to the pros, they can all score. Everybody can score. So you've got to become a complete player. And I looked very quickly at my situation and said, I'm going to have to learn how to play both ways and to have a career and not just a cup of coffee with the Maple Leafs.
Right.
Let me take you up to 67. Everybody knows, and I mentioned that was the last Stanley Cup winning team. You were still in your early 20s
right.
at that point, but a lot of the guys on the team, we mentioned George Armstrong, Marcel Pronovo, Red Kelly, Johnny Bauer, Terry Sawchuk, a lot of those guys were into their mid to late 30s, and even Johnny Bauer was in his 40s. Yeah. So they were kind of on their last legs. Did you have the sense at that time with all those old guys, and it was a great victory that year, but did you have the sense that this could be the last hurrah for this team for many years to come?
Yes, it was dubbed the over-the-hill gang, of course, and we were. The average age was way up there, close to 30, average age, which is, when you look at the kids playing today on the Leafs, the average age is low 20s. You know? So yeah, we had a veteran team, and these were the same guys that played on those 3 cups in a row in the early 60s for the most part. The thing to remember, Jim, this was expansion year. The year after that cup,
that's right.
The league expanded to 12 teams. We, as a group, that knew this was a key moment in hockey history. Whoever won the Stanley Cup that year was going to be remembered for a long time. It was the last year of the old 6-team league, number 1. It was centennial year.
Yeah.
And it was Expo 67 year. And before the series started against Montreal, the finals, word came to us that the mayor, Drapeau, I believe it was, of Montreal, had already selected a spot in the Quebec Pavilion for the Stanley Cup.
Oh,
so
that was a bit of a challenge.
That was the wrong thing to say.
Yes.
We definitely realized that, and we did not want it to end up in the Quebec Pavilion. It did end up at Expo 67, but it was in the Ontario Pavilion. So anyway, that was created a little incentive for us. But you're right. Myself, I was 22, Johnny Bauer 42. I was the young guy, he was the oldest. This, for a lot of those guys, was the last hurrah. The following season, there's no question, some of them were going to retire. Red Kelly retired and became a coach of the Kings, Los Angeles Kings. A number of our guys were drafted by the teams that were coming into the league. Bob Bond comes to mind. He went to the Oakland Seals. That's right. This team was never going to be together again. This was it. It was a wonderful experience to follow those veterans. You could just tell they knew, and they did everything they could to end their careers on a high note. And Walton was up by that time, and Stemkowski and myself and Jimmy Pappin, the younger guys, we just followed their lead. And they were such professionals, and everything came together for us, and We weren't expected to win. We weren't expected to win the first series against Chicago. We got by them.
Yeah, you did.
And then we weren't supposed to beat Montreal either. And so it was a very sweet win for all of us.
Yeah.
So those were the last hurrah years, let's say. But you played for another 14 years, and you had a couple of very good years with teammates like Daryl Sittler and Salming and Lanny McDonald. And you also had the pleasure of being taken over by the irascible Harold Ballard. And what was it like working with Ballard? And what were those years like for you until you finally retired in 1981?
Well, Helen, I always say to people, I'm so blessed to have actually overlapped 2 eras. I played in that 16 league for 3 years, and what an experience that was. We traveled everywhere by train. There was no flying. And then when expansion came into being, I had the opportunity to play with the Daryl Sittlers, as you mentioned, Boreas Salmings. So I really consider myself very, very blessed to have had that opportunity. Now, Harold Ballard, that was another whole story. There's a bit of a connection with my family. As I mentioned, my father joined the Air Force as soon as he could. When he turned 18 during the war, but he was playing for the Toronto Marlies then, and Harold was the coach. Harold Ballard was his coach.
Wow.
He owned the Marlies. That's sort of how Harold.
So you both had the experience.
So there was the connection with my father, and because of that, Harold really was fond of my father. He told me that many times. He really liked my dad. My dad was a good player. The war broke up his career. So after I turned pro with the Leafs, there was that connection between me and Harold. He would always say, "How's your dad doing? I love your dad. And he should have been a pro if he hadn't joined the service," and all these wonderful things. And so that was helpful to me to have a relationship with Harold. He was always very good.
So he wasn't so bad to you as he was with some of the other players.
Yeah, he was very good to me.
That's
and,
good.
There were a lot of, we can talk about Harold here all day, but he did some wonderful things. He did some wonderful things behind the scenes, we understand.
Yes.
And he was very generous, supported a lot of wonderful charities, but he liked to call things and his own way, and his idea of being in the newspaper or whatever, whether it was good news or bad news, it didn't matter as long as you were in the paper.
So let's talk about how you experienced retirement. Was it easy for you to retire? I understand that you had some challenges with a bout of clinical depression.
Yes.
How did you manage that?
Well, retirement is always something when you were playing a professional sport that you know is down there. You don't want to address it. You don't want to think about it. But as my career progressed, it became something that I started to pay more attention to. And back in that era, Helen, we didn't make a lot of money like they do in all sports today, not just hockey. We made fair money, and we loved to play the game that we played, but we knew there would be an end one day. And I think a lot of the mindset of players from that era would be, we'd do things in the summer. We'd experiment in the summer with jobs, knowing that we're all going to have a second job. You use the game of hockey, at least I did, and I think others would agree with me, as a stepping stone. You loved the game, you loved the game, played as hard as you could, as long as you could, knowing there would be another career. So I did work in the summers trying to decide what I was going to do when I was finished. And my father and I we ended up, we were partners in a tourist business up north, so that's basically what I did most of my summers. It was sort of a family business and thoroughly enjoyed by all.
And you also wrote a book.
Yes, I've retired twice, and people may remember that now. I was playing on a line with Daryl Sittler and Tyler Williams, had the best year of my career point-wise, production-wise. After that season, same routine during the summer. We had the resort, so I was spending time up north, and I was training, but physically I felt very good. Mentally, there seemed to be a problem. There seemed to be a dark cloud following me around. I was negative and pessimistic about things, and here I just come off my best season ever. I went to training camp knowing that there's something not right, and I played all the exhibition games. And the day before the final exhibition game, I should say, we were stretching with teammates, and my roommate of 8 years, Brian Glennie, was beside me, and I said to him, I'm going to retire today. And he fell over because he was my closest friend. We were roommates.
Ron, sorry to interrupt. This is about 76 that this happened. 76, 77?
75.
Yeah. Okay.
So, long story made short, I just felt I couldn't play the way I wanted to. I just didn't feel I could contribute to the team like I wanted to. I went to Leaf Management, and this is no judgment of Leaf Management. This was the way it was with all sports when it comes to things like mental illness, depression, concussions, which are all tied together.
Yeah, we know that now.
Yeah, we certainly do. And I basically said to them, look, I know how important it is to have good chemistry on a team, and I don't want to be a player this year that's in the lineup and out of the lineup, so I'm going to step back. I'm not going to close the door completely.
Ron, I've got to interrupt you there because we've only got about 30 seconds left. You got over this.
Yes.
And you are in great shape today, and you've been with the Hockey Hall of Fame now for nearly 20 years.
Very quickly, Jim, I had to get help. I had to get help.
You did.
That I wasn't. I didn't know what I was dealing with at that time, and I just spent time sort of getting better on my own. I came back, played 4 years, retired, and that's when the worst part of the depression hit, and that's when I had to get help.
And that's where we've got to interrupt. But you're great now, and you're a very happy guy, and it's been wonderful having you with us.
And it's a pleasure to
Thanks
talk
so
to you
much.
today.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Joining both of you.
We'll be back with more Toronto Files after this short break.